Thank you for that, and it's a great pleasure to be here at the Lit Fest, talking to Vijayendra Rao about his new book with Paramita Sanyal on oral democracy. I'm Principal Secretary Panchayat Raj in Karnataka. I see many familiar faces. Hello to all of you. And maybe I'll just start by asking Dr. Rao what oral democracy is all about.
So, we all know what electoral democracy is. But it helps a little bit to think about what electoral democracy does. Why do we have it? And it's a very basic, simple point. It is to solve a problem of collective action. If everybody in this group had to make decisions about something or the other, the easiest way of doing it is by electing somebody to represent everybody who then makes the decision for you in parliament or whatever else. That's electoral democracy. We also know the problems with electoral democracy. And there are basically three problems. There are many. Two C's, corruption and clientelism, which we all know about. And the third one is elite capture, the dominance by elite. So corruption, clientelism, and capture, the three C's. Yeah? And this is not just true of India, it's true all over the world. Wherever there is electoral democracy, there are challenges. So we go back to an earlier form of democracy. What is the prior form of democracy? That was a form of democracy where people got together and through a process of consensus building came to a common decision. The idea of collective action through conversation, through persuasion. Yeah? That is oral democracy. It goes back to the Greeks, it goes back to our traditions in Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. You have this going on all over the subcontinent, all over the world. What happened over the course of the democratic revolution following the French Revolution was that the emphasis was placed on electoral democracy, which we inherited from the British. And oral democracy, the direct democracy was forgotten till Gandhiji made it a very central part of the nationalist platform in his book Village Swaraj, where he said that villages should be given the ability to make their own decisions, which then led over many years to the 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution. So in fact, what this book is about is our panchayat system, which affects 850 million of our rural citizens. Every Indian village has both an electoral democracy where they elect a village council and a deliberative body, a conversational body where any village resident can go and make their opinions heard. In Karnataka, it's held 4 times a year. Karnataka pioneered this before the 73rd Amendment in the bundle panchayat system. And it is effectively the biggest deliberative system in the whole world. There's nothing like it, where 850 million people have access to direct voice, direct decision making. That's what this book is about.
Thanks, Biju, for that very thoughtful summary of what the book is about. Maybe I should also tell the audience what Karnataka's panchayats, a little bit about Karnataka's panchayats. Karnataka has, like the rest of the country, a 3-tier panchayat raj system. These are local governments at the village level, that is the Gram Panchayat, at the block level, that is the Taluk Panchayat, and at the district level, which is the Zilla Panchayat. So we have 30 district panchayats, that is the Zilla Panchayats, 176 Taluk Panchayats, and as many as 6,021 Gram Panchayats, which bring together about 60% of the population of Karnataka. So, and at the national level, 850 million people and 2 million panchayats, would that be? So, let me ask you, how can state policy affect the quality of discourse in these Gram Sabhas?
So what we do in this book is that we compared the 4 South Indian states by recording 300 Gram Sabhas. It's an analysis of 300 Gram Sabhas. So at the end, it's interesting that this is at a literary festival because if you read the book, most of the book is basically just transcripts of these meetings, And in that sense, they read like a drama. I mean, we had to go through these. It took us 10 years to do the book because we had to read all 300 of these very, very carefully. Each Gram Sabha lasts for about 2 hours. What we did analytically was that we compared villages on the borders of the modern South Indian states that prior to 1956 belonged to the same political entity. So for instance, think of South Kannada and Kasargod. Prior to 1956, they were all part of the Madras Presidency. There was an arbitrary border drawn in 1956, which means that you had Kannada speakers sitting in Kerala as well as in Karnataka. In fact, Anil Kumble is from Kerala, actually. Yeah? His village of Kumble is in Kasargod district in Kerala. Yeah? So when you match those villages, Kannada speakers in Kerala with Kannada speakers in South Kannada, Telugu speakers in Chittoor with Telugu speakers in Kolar. That's one of the things. Or Telugu speakers in Medak and Telugu speakers in Bidar. Or then we go down to Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Tamil speakers in Palakkad, Tamil speakers in Coimbatore. You're able to, and these are villages about 10 kilometers away from each other. So in that sense, they're part of the same culture. They marry each other, constantly exchanging brides, up and down. They're part of the same geography, they're part of the same ecological zones, economic zones. They're the same people. But they're separated by a state border. That came in 1956. So, if you look at linguistic theory, there's something called a linguistic community, which means that if we speak the same language, we are within the same region, we are from the same economic structure, we're from the same caste, people talk the same way. You probably know this from your own families. We all have a style of talking. Yeah? These people in their homes should talk the same way. They are Kannada speakers in Kasargod or Kannada speakers in South Kannada. They both have plantation lives. Yeah? But we find that, in fact, they're talking in a completely different way. These Gram Sabhas, and we show you in the book, are entirely different across those state borders. And the reason is state policy. That because of the implementation of the 70th Amendment, which is ultimately implemented, as Uma said in the Karnataka case, via a state act, how much attention the state government has paid over the years to the Panchayat system completely changes the nature of discourse. So in that sense, state policy is a central player in making some Gram Sabhas and Panchayats more effective than others. That's what our book tries to show, how that happens.
So which is really a very optimistic message that you're conveying at a time when democracy is under stress in so many places across the world. Because if state policy in neighboring states can actually impact deliberative discourse in these village assemblies so differently, especially when rural India is, as you've pointed out, very far from being an ideal site for deliberation. It has so many kinds of inequalities. It has gender inequality, it has high levels of poverty and illiteracy, and you find Gram Sabhas functioning within these constraints. I think the message of optimism in this book is really quite unique, and that's something that struck me while reading the book. I also wanted to ask you about this natural experiment. You do take 3 types of Gram Panchayats: high literacy, medium literacy, and low literacy. And how do the Gram Sabhas, how do the conversations function within these different settings?
That's a good question. One of the things, the preconceptions we have in urban areas, and dare I say it in the IAS as well, is that Gram Panchayats do not function. Gram Sabhas are useless things. If you visit any Gram Sabha close by, it looks like chaos. Yeah? What we want to point out to you in this book, show you evidence that in fact it's not chaos. There's a certain political logic to what goes on in there for a certain reason. Yeah? One of those reasons is dignity. Let me give you an example that we have in the book. There is a village that's going through a drought. This is up in Bidar. It's going through a drought. It is a village which is where it's on an incline, and at the top of the hill, the upper caste live. At the bottom of the hill, the lower caste live. Okay? They're all complaining that their bhavis, their wells have no water. Nam bhavil needed. There's no water in the well. Okay? The Dalit man raises his hand and says, "Nam bhaviyali bekadash needed bandili." Knowing full well what he's saying by saying that. Okay? So they're poking the structure via this system because nobody can do anything to them inside that Gram Sabha because it is a sacred space, because it is a political space. If the Panchayat president says, shut up, they will lose the whole vote bank. So that becomes an equal discursive playing field. People are equal in how they speak. That brings to the question of literacy. You know, Partha Chatterjee, the great political theorist, sitting in his coffee shops, addafying in Calcutta, has made a distinction between political society and civil society, which some political scientists here might hear about. He says that rural Indians don't have any civil society, they only have political society. What is that? That basically the state controls everybody. You shove people here, you shove people there, you shove them into categories, shove them there, shove them there. Civil society is the privilege of the Bangalore Literature Festival, the coffee shops in Calcutta. Yeah? It doesn't belong to rural areas. What we want to show you in this book, that is complete nonsense. Yeah? You read the transcripts that we have excerpted in this book, and you can read all the transcripts. All our transcripts are online now. You will see the extent to which there are these conversations, meaningful, vigorous debates going on in these spaces. And what is interesting is the second criticism that's given, that how can illiterate people have these gram sabhas? What we show, yes, literacy helps. There's no question. Illiteracy works like a blindfold. If you are illiterate, you cannot read a budget sheet. So what happens is elites take over. You know, there are these elite stewards. They take over and guide people about how to do things. But even in illiterate spaces, there is a very wonderful term that a sociologist called Naomi Hussain came up with. She calls it rude accountability. And you go to in a Gram Sabha in Bidar, you'll see this, people shouting away. They're not shouting away just to make noise. They're shouting away to attract attention to their problems. You see? So there is an illiterate way of engaging. There's a literate way of engaging. You go to Kerala, they're having very, very sophisticated discussions about this budget and this account and that account, and having these budget sheets. And it looks like it's basically a very boring conversation. You don't even want to watch this. By the way, the most interesting Gram Sabhas are in Karnataka. Because the variation, you go to the south, you go to the north, completely different. There's a lot of activity, a lot of action. And there's also a long history of it. What we find matters more than literacy is state policy. When we recorded our Gram Sabhas, which took a long time to analyze, which is 2002 or 2004, Chandrababu Naidu was the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, and he had killed the Panchayat system. He had not held Panchayat elections in 10 years. He had undermined the Panchayat system completely. You go to those Gram Sabhas in Andhra Pradesh, this was old Andhra Pradesh, wherever you went, whether you went, in our case, to Bidar or to Chittoor district, the Gram Sabhas were equally bad, regardless of whether they were highly literate or illiterate. You compared them to the neighboring state, you had very vibrant Gram Sabhas. Yeah? So state policy matters much more than illiteracy in determining how good the Gram Sabha is. These are neglected spaces, and they're vibrant spaces that we should pay more attention to.
Thank you, and that's the second most optimistic message which comes through in the book, because as I'd like to share, that the issues within the purview of the Gram Sabha are critical to the lives of the poor, the rural poor. The selection of beneficiaries for public programs, for example. A Mahatma Gandhi Narega card, should it be issued to X or to Y? Should it not be issued to Y? If so, why not? Allocation and monitoring of village budgets. Selection of public goods, for example, roads, drains, common property resources. These are all in the purview of the Gram Sabha. Houses. To whom should a house be given? If 10 people are deserving, who is the most deserving of those 10 people? These are the decisions that are made in the Gram Sabha. Karnataka is also a pioneer of a unique form of Gram Sabha called the Makkala Gram Sabha, which is the children's Gram Sabha. As we know, children have the right to participation, but their voices are often not heard in the formulation of policy. Karnataka started a practice of Makkala Gram Sabhas, which is the children's Gram Sabhas. And I'm happy to say that this month, they're going to be held from November 14th to 20th in different parts of the state, except for the parts of the state which are going into elections, where they'll be held after December. It's also a good time to be talking about Gram Sabhas because the Gram Panchayat plans are being formulated in Karnataka through participation by the public. I'd like to read a very interesting study that Biju quotes in his book. When Gram Sabhas are held, governance sharply improves. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, so this is, of course, the whole issue between correlation and causality, which the recent Nobel Prize in Economics was all about. But let's keep the technical details aside. This is a simple correlation. When Gram Sabhas are held, you find that the beneficiary selection is more accurately done. Because otherwise, beneficiary selection is constant omissions and you know, but people who are rich are included, people who are poor are excluded. That sort of thing is constantly going on. And that it ends up being a very, how shall I put it, negotiated process with sums of money involved. That corrupt allocation sharply reduces. And that's just one indicator, you know. public goods allocations get better. So Gram Sabhas, what they do is that they shed light on the politics of what's going on in the villages and panchayat system. You know, it's a misconception to think that a villager, village resident, doesn't know what's going on in the public panchayat council. They know everything, everything, every little detail. Kripananpur and I, Radhika Vishwanathan, we've been studying panchayats in northern Karnataka, 20 of them now for the last 10 years, over 2 election cycles. You really see in great detail how much people know about what's going on in these systems. What the Gram Sabha does is not providing information. It is making all that discourse instead of in people's homes, bringing it to the public domain. People are discussing this in public. So which means you cannot just, I mean, whatever you do, people are watching you. Yeah? Which means you will be less able to do it, less willing to do it. At least you'll have to involve more people in that process if you're going to do it. Yeah?
So which actually brings me to another question. You have said that one reason for the effectiveness of Gram Sabhas in Kerala is the high participation of women. Could you talk a little bit about how women and other marginalized sections of people do use the space to make claims for dignity?
Right. So, you know, that's where Karnataka doesn't do as well, actually. And that is because Karnataka, for whatever reason, does not have as strong a women's self-help group movement as the neighboring states. Andhra Pradesh, of course, is the top in that. But Kerala is at Kudumbashri. Tamil Nadu is at Puduvalvu. I mean, they've been tremendous innovations, tremendous progress done in forming women's self-help groups in rural areas. Karnataka, for some reason, lags behind there. What you see in these other states is because of Kudumbashri, you have collectives of women who collectively go to the Gram Sabha and make their voices heard. Yeah? And that means that women's voices are very much part of the everyday conversation. Now, all panchayats all over India now have usually 50% reservation for women. Yeah? That, of course, makes a big difference because the women president who comes by the reservation system over time does equalize allocations to women and makes women more heard. But this other part, women's self-help groups, doesn't play such a big role. That can be easily corrected, and that I think Karnataka should pay more attention to because it will also improve the gender equity of the panchayat system.
Right. So there's another section of your book which is very interesting, which is about the role of emotions in the village assemblies as they happen. There's a negative role of disruption, but you also talk of a positive role. Would you like to elaborate on that?
So, you know, part of what we do in this book, which is more technical, it's really meant for political theorists. If you look at the literature on what is called deliberative democracy, this alternate form of democracy, it's a very Western literature dominated by Western scholars that sort of neglects the fact that how does deliberation work in our kind of settings with high levels of inequality and so on. Yeah? What we try to point out, and there's a, you know, northern scholars, global north scholars also tend to discount the idea that people can have different ways of talking. Now, as South Indians or people who live in South India as we know we are very voluble. You know, we tend to, in groups, get very emotional. That's how we speak. I mean, all over India, emotions become a very important part of how we express our ideas. Yeah, as I'm doing now. As, you know, and I mean, I'm considered a very passionate speaker when I go and speak in America. In Karnataka, I'm a normal fellow. Yeah, that's how we speak. You see, so. What we try to do in the book is to understand what are those emotional dimensions of oral democracy. And, you know, I already talked to you about root accountability. If you are uneducated, if you're illiterate, and you don't see budgets, you don't understand the jurisdiction of the Gram Sabha, you will just make noise. You will start talking in the Gram Sabha like you talk at home. Huh? You know, whatever. But you see, but that plays a useful role. That's how you check and balance others. As you get more literate, the role of emotions becomes more controlled, becomes more salient. People learn how to use the space to become more effective, as you might do in your apartment building meetings or wherever other collective meetings that you belong to. Some people get very good at it. Yeah? And they become the elite stewards of those who are not good at it. So emotions start playing, you know, you start understanding how these systems work a little bit better.
At the end of your book, you do talk about how the degree of commitment, as Biju started talking about, how much a state is committed to decentralization and uh, how it designs policies which further decentralization in its panchayats affect the citizens' capacity for civic engagement. For example, information dissemination practices, state control over the proceedings of the Gram Sabha, the presence of public officials, and the commitment of the leaders to fostering this deliberation. What information dissemination practices would you suggest? I know you've done some work in Tamil Nadu on data visualization, which especially must help the illiterate members.
So thank you, Ma. So that goes a little bit beyond the book. You know, there are various ways in which these systems can be strengthened. The thing about deliberation is that there are two things that make collective action more difficult. One thing is people have different what are called interests. What I want is different from what you may want. We have to argue about whose needs are greater. But the second one is a difference in information. I live, my father lives in Langford town. There may be some issues going on there. You might live in Malleshwaram. There may be other issues going on there. I don't know what goes on there. You don't know what goes on in my neighborhood. How do we prove to each other that my need is greater than yours? Yeah? There's an information asymmetry. What we did in Tamil Nadu, in Theni district, throughout the district, in 200 villages, that we gave village communities the ability to collect their own survey data about their own well-being. Women in that village surveyed every other family in the village. And they surveyed the quality of public goods, of bridges, of wells, of you know, common property resources. And the whole thing, we worked with the MIT Media Lab for this, was visualized on a screen in what we call co-produced visualizations. It wasn't somebody coming and doing some fancy statistical graphic. It was working with the community. So for instance, you know, the lady I was working with, Cassandra Shia, she's a Chinese-American, wonderful, brilliant computer scientist. Her art ended up looking very Chinese. I mean, we had this thing called face forces, which is basically looking at intra-household bargaining. And the more the man had power within the family, the bigger his face was, the more woman had power, the bigger her face was. The communities didn't like the way these people looked. They said, there's no mustache, there's no bindi, you know, please put that in, you know. So we ended up with these visualizations. For instance, we showed diet by showing a banana leaf with different types of food in it. If that banana leaf was blank, that family was going hungry. All these were visualized, and therefore, and the quality of public goods was visualized. We found that completely shifted the quality of deliberation. It became much more informed, and decisions became much quicker. So it became much more efficient. We're now going to do this all over Indonesia. There's a World Bank project, $100 million World Bank project, go to all over Indonesia. I'm hoping to do it in Nepal, which has seen a huge decentralization process. But to my regret, nobody in India has expressed interest in this yet. I hope Uma can be persuaded.
That's going to be my last question to you, which is an invitation to come and work with us in Karnataka. Most definitely.
I'd love to.
We'll take that forward. Yeah. I guess time's up unless...
You have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
We open it up.
So, yeah, so maybe we can open it up for discussion now.
Sir, really, it's like my pleasure to meet you, sir, because I am working on a similar kind of project. Mana uri abhivruddhi mana chetlo means developing our society depends in our own hands. They're in our own hands. I have taken charge of my hometown. Yeah, 1 minute. So, sir, like I want to learn from you. I have done a documentation on how to develop the rural development. Whatever my ideas, we have done a massive camps. We have given circulated pamphlets across my hometown and my village, and we have got it, like I have engaged school children as well, where they have brought submitted the forms. We have collected all the writings, sir, and I want to learn from you, sir, how we can bring the change in my hometown and rural place where I belong to, sir.
Let's talk afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
This platform is for questions only, please.
So, like, we're quite familiar with the oral democracy happening in the villages. How much can that actually scale up to our larger democracy? And would it be going back to Greco times or something that can apply to us?
Yeah, no, so that's a good question. You know, the Gram Sabha is an institutionalized space that allows this to happen. So since the Constitution has given us that institution gets a lot easier. Yeah? There's no institutional space of a similar kind in cities. Now, the Aam Aadmi Party has introduced Sabhas, Ward Sabhas in Delhi, which is the first time that innovation is introduced in rural areas. Janagraha tried to do it in Bangalore, but you know, without a constitutional amendment, without government commitment, it's not going to happen. But what's happening all over. I mean, we can learn from other models. There's a country, small country called Estonia, where online deliberation is a routine part of how they make decisions. There are something called, James Fishkin at Stanford has been advocating for random groups of citizens to come together and deliberate on important public issues that then get fed into parliamentary decisions all over. They tried this in China. I think technology provides a platform that can be an alternate platform to the physical Gram Sabha that will allow us to participate. The question is, the government has to listen. Yeah? And we don't have that system in India. We don't have it in any democracy. I mean, Barack Obama, when he became president, decided to open it up. He had a White House forum. Yeah? Everybody, the only thing they wanted to talk about was legalizing marijuana. That's the only thing that happened in that forum. Because those were the crazy IT nerds who sort of decided to participate. So, but how do we make that better? It's actually a very, very important. Many, many countries in the world are struggling with that very question. We are not struggling with it as much in India, which I think is a real pity. Because we have the capacity, we have the people, and we have the technology.
Hello, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. So my question is an empirical one. That is, the data set that you've used in your book focuses on mostly South Indian states, right? Yes. So what explains the absence of Gram Sabhas in Northern India, number one? And the second question is, I think the larger outcome of your book is that state intent matters a lot more than people's literacy. But isn't that, in a normative sense, isn't that a challenge? Because you find very few leaders who are so committed, like Namboodiripad, or in Karnataka you had...
Namboodiripad was not committed at all. I mean, at the end it was Thomas Isaac who was currently the finance minister. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, leaving that aside, I mean, Karnataka, the great hero is Abdul Nazir Saab. Let's never forget that man. Hats off to him and Ramkrishna Hegde. Without that, none of this would have happened. Why the North doesn't have it, it's beginning to have it. You take Rajasthan, you take Bihar. I've worked in Bihar for many years. You find it, Nitish Kumar is committed to this. It's happening, they're going up by leaps and bounds. Rajasthan has had a long history. Madhya Pradesh has had a long history. There's a waxing and a waning, even in Karnataka. Some governments like it, some governments don't like it. Instead of having a consistent sort of steady progress upward, they pull back. And MLAs don't like this. For God's sake, senior IAS officers don't like this. I don't know. I will not mention a person here, but I've had big arguments with one person in this room about this very question as a senior IAS officer. Okay, this is not. This is because I think that idea of getting people to realize that space, while noisy, while chaotic, has some meaning that can be pushed forward is something that has to be brought into our mindset. That's one of the reasons I'm so glad to be talking to all of you. Please go visit a Gram Sabha. They happen 4 times a year. Republic Day, Independence Day, Gandhi Jayanti, and May Day. Yeah, all over the state. Just go visit. Yeah, it's great fun. I'm sure Umaji will facilitate it for you.
Yeah, we'd be, happy to organize visits, especially research visits by scholars and interns. Most welcome.
Ma'am, sir, you made a comment about Partha Chatterjee. So you say Partha Chatterjee says we do not have civil society in rural areas, but only political society, and you disagree. But every single one of your examples has been about state policy. So where is the civil society in this?
No, I'm sorry. Maybe you misheard what I said. State policy facilitates it. Yeah, because state policy, without the constitutional amendment, there'll be no Gram Sabha. Yeah, without Ramkrishna Hegde and Abdul Nazir Saab, there'll be no 73rd Amendment. Without Gandhiji, there'll be no Karnataka Mandal Panchayat system. That all comes from thought leaders who are moving the discourse forward. That's very true. And ultimately, it has to come through the legal system. But once it's there, citizens are participating. They're not being forced to come. It's not mandated that you have to participate in the Gram Sabha. They're coming voluntarily. And they're saying all kinds of, read the book, they're saying all kinds of things, completely spontaneously. That's a civil society. Yeah? They're not being manipulated to say this or that. They're not lemmings running off a cliff. They're coming there voluntarily. That's where I disagree with Parthaji. Okay?
Mr. Rao, your book is available at the bookstore?
I don't know. I didn't find it there. But it's open access. It's free online. Just Google Oral Democracy with my name or Paramita's name. It's a free download on the internet. Cambridge University Press. So it's free.
Thank you so much.